I am here with Kyle Morton. Kyle, thank you so much for being a part of the project. It's great to have you here. You know, I've been a fan for ages, and I'm just really excited to get this music out to people. Thank you.
The feeling's totally mutual. Thank you for having me.
So, Kyle, there are a bunch of stuff we could talk about. I'm trying to ask the first two questions the same of everybody, and
Sure.
so that first one is, how has this last year been? Right, the pandemic, the protests, the politics. How has it affected your art, your life? Anything you think you can summarize, which I know is a big thing. But
Yeah,
yeah,
a lot of thoughts just came rushing in. I two things about the past year, and they're both about time, but it's felt like so many different years and so many different worlds that have been traversed over the last 12 months. Um, and at the same time, it's like the structures of time have completely broken down, like going to work or having like a regular schedule, or engagements that like external engagements that structured my life. I'm sure lots of people can relate to this, they've gone away or they've been completely reduced. So um it's been a strange time. Like sometimes it feels like I'm living in a dream where, like, you know you're going along and everything seems sort of predictable, and suddenly you're like rushed, like miles down the road, and you don't know how that happened. You just kind of like in a David Lynch movie, you're out behind the restaurant and there's a monster in the dumpster. you know um so it's been a strange year that way, and every time I like look at a picture or think back to, like, the protests this summer, um or like the wildfires we had here, it's just like these really vivid, like, wow, that was this last year. That feels like it was a lifetime ago.
yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
It does feel like we are all sort of living the Mulholland Drive life these days.
Yes, living in Mulholland Drive.
And yet you made an album. You didn't just make this great song for us, but you and Typhoon made an album.
Yeah, that was, speaking of structures to hold it all together, that was the one thing, not the one thing. I'm lucky to have a lot of good things in my life, but that was the thing that was my work, basically, for like starting in, I think, May, June, July was when I was really seriously writing those songs. Um, and then arranging them with the band and getting them recorded, like that ended up being the kind of scaffolding to make sense of like what I'm like, okay, I'm waking up so I can do this thing. Which was, perversely what I've always fantasized about, which is like, my living would be making music. But except for when we're on tour, like life just doesn't pan out that way. I've always had to have a day job and a lot of other things going on. So, but yeah, it was cool. It was real. I'm really thankful that I hadn't written anything since Offerings, really, nothing substantial. And then, it really was like a month there where I wrote almost all of the lyrics, and I wrote all the lyrics first for these songs, with the exception of one song on the record. So, um, I'm a really slow, laborious writer, and this was really different, where I just kind of would sit down and like it was really kind of just all occurring to me in these kind of fits. So that,
Mm.
that was neat.
Yeah, that's a good thing, right?
Just
And you
just
got to
knowing
look for the
writing.
silver linings.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, so
So
thanks. Yeah, so we
did
made
you
a.
did you decide, like, I'm gonna make a record during this time, or did it just sort of come to you?
So the background there was well before COVID. At the beginning of the year, my wife, and this was, my wife and I have been together. We were only married about 5 years ago, but we've been together for like 15 years now, I think. So, we're not going anywhere. But she had kind of lovingly said, like, if you don't make a record this year, we're getting a divorce. Because she knows how unhappy I get when I'm not making music, and when I'm just not not engaging with that part of my life. So she kind of did this mock ultimatum, but it kind of worked, because then I was like, well, you're not, like, yeah, right, of course you're not going to divorce me if I don't finish a record this year. But then I was like, but if I don't finish it, like, and I call your bluff, that's just kind of sad, isn't it? Like that, like, in a way your ultimatum's kind of working, because if I just don't do it but then you stay with me, it's just kind of like we're in this place where, you know I just, the expectations have just completely gone out the window. So I was like, I'm going to do this. And then COVID hit, and there was like, a month of just kind of being stunned. And I work for a music venue. That's my day job, or it was. And I'm still kind of like doing a little bit of administrative work for them, well, during the hibernation. But that first month was just like, it was a pretty traumatic month for music venues, for the music industry. It was everybody I knew getting laid off, and trying to figure out unemployment, and trying not to get sick. So um, once it kind of became apparent this was going on for a while, I started writing. And so it really was just this, like, okay, well, I need to finish a record this year. Now I have time. Let's see what happens. And I didn't have like an overarching structure like I typically do for Typhoon. This was really just starting with the songs and with ideas as they occurred to me, which was a much more a freer way of writing. So yeah, some of it I think is some of my favorite writing I've done, because I didn't have to like it wasn't this Procrustean like forcing something into the concept.
Right.
Yeah.
It is on some level a departure, but also it's you. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, I
right?
can't. Yeah.
Definitely. And I think it's beautiful. I think it's a fantastic album. Do you think that it helped in any way as you went through the last year doing it?
Yeah, I mean, the writing. What I remembered doing this was that I loved writing when I'm actually doing it, when I can actually make myself sit and write, and have those, and let those kind of moments of clarity hit me. Um, that was my favorite part. In fact, I could have just not recorded it. I wouldn't have been holding up my end of the bargain with Danielle, but I just writing the songs was kind of enough. Like, and that
It's
helped me a
interesting.
lot. That just kind of gave me a feeling of music for me is just like kind of, it's the best way of thinking that I have. Like, I think best through writing music. Um, and I don't know how good that thinking is, like, in the scheme of things, but for me, like, being able to think is the same as being able to write music. So when I'm doing it, it really is like kind of pulls me out of the muck.
Oh, there's so much to talk about right there.
Yeah.
Um, let me just ask one part of it first. Then that
Sure.
is, so you say you wrote the lyrics first. Is that typical for how you go about?
No, so, yes and no. Like, there are a handful of songs that I wrote the lyrics first over the years. Like, Common Sentiments from our album White Lighter was a song where all lyrics kind of just came to me, and like I was brushing my teeth and I was like, oh wow, that's, there's a song, like, it was, like, almost most of our songs are not at all like that. Like, I'll have an idea, maybe I'll come up with some words, then I'll like write the music around those words, and then there's a kind of like back and forth dialectic with that. With our last record, Offerings, it was all music first, and then I kind of filled in the words. So um,
Oh,
no, this was different. In fact, I didn't pick up a guitar. I just like I didn't even. I always think it's important to write it out by hand, but I even disregarded that rule. I was just writing it on my iPhone notepad. It was the first time I was like, I like this thing. It was the first time I have like a self-loathing relationship with my iPhone. It was like, oh, I can just write it down here, and then just put it away, and it was on silent or on airplane mode. It wasn't even a phone. It was just like, faster way of writing. Um, oh, it's really, I mean, like I said, it was like, for me, it was like thinking. It was just like thinking through some ideas and putting them together. I
right.
guess more like how I imagine a poet would work, but I don't really consider myself a poet.
How come?
Uh, because I think, and I this isn't just false modesty or something. Like, I think that my words need the music. Like, I think it's important for them to have the music, for them to be what to to really work. Um,
So can you talk a little bit more about that? So why do you think that is, or how do you think that works? Is
yeah,
it that the music is a kind of performance of the words, and the performance of the words is important to their meaning, or is there something deeper than that?
yeah.
I don't,
There's
not to
that.
say that's not deep, but
Yeah, no. But yeah, I mean, I think it like works on a couple levels. Like, it kind of it fixes them, which I've been thinking a lot about this word fixing lately, and I feel like I think it was after reading one of the chapters in your latest book, which is excellent, and I hope we get to talk about. But part of it is this kind of trying to like putting it in music seems to fix it somewhere into like this what the mnemonic device or you know whatever I want to think of it. Like I don't have any other kind of like skills like crafty craftsman skills. So like all I have is music. So it's this thing I can kind of nail the thought to. Um, it's also like it's hard to talk about music, and I'm not the first person to observe that. Like, but a word said without music can suddenly take on a completely different, like it'll do a sort of paradigm shift when you add a certain chord change to it. Um, and so I really like how the music kind of brings that in. Like, I think there's a line on, for example, there's a line in that song, and so what if you were right? Um, where it says, and so what if you were right? Then nothing ever that it's too late to make a change, but you didn't even try. And then the way that the kind of chords walk back down to the minor on that last bit, like I could say the line and it would be like, well, that's, you know, it's okay. And then I'd play it and I'd actually like every time I play that, I would start like, you know, welling up with tears. It's the way it fit together. Um, like so I don't know. I don't know if the answer is your question, but like it would sort of get at something with the music that it couldn't with the words alone. But then some poetry, you know, gets at the thing I think it's meant to get at, and you know, music would only slow it down.
Yeah.
Like Galway
This is
Kinnell, for example, or I have a friend Zach Schomburg who's been really influential for me. Yeah,
I think poetry has to be performed on some level always, even if you're just performing it in your head when you're reading it. You
yeah,
have to sort of say it in your mind because it's
yeah,
the sound of the words matter. And
totally.
yeah, and it's not just yeah, it's not just the sound of the words, but it's how they're said and how.
Yeah,
So
he's saying and yeah,
I have a
yeah,
friend he's a really great painter, and this was many years ago, and a song was on, and I was confused about some word that was in the song, and I'd
yeah,
never known it. I was trying to figure out what it was, and he was just surprised that I knew any of the words. And he said that he listens to music while he's painting, and he doesn't pay any attention to the lyrics at all. He doesn't know any of the words. It's just
yeah,
sound for him. Even the vocals are just sounds.
yeah,
And he just thought I was the weirdest person in the world that I knew lyrics
yeah.
to music, and I
That's
thought he was the weirdest. But
I
that's
mean, and no offense, but I think you're the weirdest.
yeah.
And I am too, you know, and everyone I know who loves lyrics, like I only say that I was actually just having an email conversation with a friend of his who used to be a songwriter, who became a sociologist, was kind of doing a study trying to show that lyrics had become more simplistic in the last couple decades. And I didn't read the whole report, and I kind of think like even coming up with that criteria is a little suspect. Like, what exactly is like, you know, something could be like grammatically simple but have a lot packed into it, for example. But it got us into this conversation of like all, you know, so many people we know not even like, oh, I don't hear the lyrics, or I don't, you know, I don't like that's an afterthought. And that's frustrating. I mean, that's frustrating to me because like for selfish reasons, like for me it's all about the lyrics. Like for our music, like I like our music, and especially when we got the whole band going, I think that it stands on its own. But like for me, the whole point, like the like not the whole point, I know it's tough. I mean, the point is the community, but for me, like the lyrics are the thing that I can look back and be like, that I have my moments, that's pretty good. Like
It's interesting.
there's
Yeah.
something in this that you know.
I
It's
think when they come together, they're more than the sum of their parts,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like,
totally.
yeah.
There's a
So it's interesting that some people only concentrate on one
on the
part of
music.
it.
Yeah, yeah, and I even have a like I'm thinking of a very close friend of mine who's like a musical genius. Like she's one of my favorite songwriters, and she writes really really cool and kind of like has an unintuitive way of writing lyrics, but she like, she's like, "Oh, I don't like that song." I'm like, "What?" Like when he has that line about this, she's like, "Oh yeah, I didn't. Yeah, I guess that's cool. I never picked up on that." Like someone who can be so sensitive, and I almost took that sometimes as proof that I wasn't really a musician in the like that for
No.
me it was more about the thinking or more like I don't know. Like I that's not quite there, but I know folks that like you're saying they own like it's really the abstract music that they hear. And for
Right.
me, I can get I mean, I can tap my toe to anything and I like all kinds of music, but you know, it'd be like listening to like Leonard Cohen, for example, where he just have a line about how he's just the brief elaboration of a tube, and it's just like
Come on now.
there it is. I quit.
Yeah.
you know.
Right.
So
There's the old joke, like this is a joke even older than I am, but of the American Bandstand, when Dick Clark would ask some kid, "So why do you
yeah,
like this song?" "Well, it's got a good beat and you can dance to it,
yeah,
and that's why I like the song."
yeah,
So I guess there's always been a history of that, but it
yeah.
just seems weird to me. It's like,
And they're not wrong. I mean, I'm not to say like yeah,
no,
dance to it. I mean, I'm a horribly repressed person, and like I hate like I don't hate dancing, but I'm not good at dancing. And so like good for you. I have a lot of envy for people that it's just like for them it's just the rhythm and the music and the kind of getting
right,
transported.
yeah.
Yeah,
But it's still interesting though. It's like like we were saying, it's more than the sum of its parts.
yeah,
So the philosopher in me just thinks the phenomenology, like
yeah,
buttered bread is not bread plus
but
butter. It's
yeah,
its own
right,
thing, right? Its own thing.
yeah,
So I say to somebody, "So why are you eating so much buttered bread?" And they say, "Because I love butter. I
yeah.
just got to have more butter." I think, well, the
Well,
bread is just a delivery system for the butter. Okay, I
yeah,
guess I get that, but you're
yeah,
missing something, I think, a little bit.
yeah. I mean, especially when there's such a well, yeah, there's a lot to unpack here because there's so much emphasis on like on the lead vocalist and in pop music now if you compare that to Beethoven's heyday. Although maybe not. I mean, I guess the opera world like the soprano occupied a pretty anyway. But but I'm thinking like when there's so much there's so much focus on the lead vocalist, but maybe not so much on the words. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, let's get back to another part of what you said there about thinking. You think best
Yeah.
through music. So are you thinking, so is this a combination of lyrics and music then too that you're thinking through? And what do you mean exactly by saying that that's how
Yeah.
you think? By the way, Einstein said that he didn't, when he was thinking about physics, he didn't think in words, he thought in music.
Oh wow, that's neat.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
Einstein and Kyle Morton.
Yeah, there we go.
There you go.
Always knew it. Yeah.
So what do you mean by that claim?
Um yeah, so I don't even I mean, I think for me like my I, I'll start with a George Saunders quote cuz I know we both are fans of George Saunders.
Yeah.
I listened to an interview with him recently and he said that for him writing is he said I have a strange mind and writing is how I put my strange mind to work. And I really liked that. And and in applying that to me, it's like my mind is very prone to sort of spinning off into like I can cover a lot of ground, but it's hard to get back to where I started. So it's hard to have a sense of continuity in where I'm starting from and where I arrive at and what becomes in between those 2 points. So for me, music is this kind of like it becomes then like the structure. I mean, I was just talking about structures of time, and I guess it's not totally different from this about okay, I'm writing. There's a rhythm that I'm feeling right now, and that has to and this has to kind of work into that. Um, and then I mean, this almost seems like a cliche, but like when there are kind of some rules you're working with, that's when I find that I get surprised by things like say I've got like like a 4 line verse, and I want these parts to rhyme, and like that's when I'm humming it to myself, that's kind of how it sounds. And then so then maybe that helps me find the word that's just perfect because it rhymes. I mean, so sometimes it surprises me like that. Sometimes it's like, oh no, that doesn't need to rhyme because I thought it kind of needed to, but I rather like it when I can subvert that. But it just kind of gives me a place where I'm starting from, and that can kind of lead me on as I go through these thoughts. So it's yeah, that's probably as close as I can get. It's kind of like the music kind of like is this little like torch that can kind of carry me through this thought I'm trying to have.
That
And then
makes
again,
sense. Yeah.
and that really is just like becomes a kind of glorified mnemonic device. It's like I really thought about like that for offerings. It's like I really want to try to condense these like synthesize some thoughts I have about being a person and memory and dying and the death of memory. I want to get these kind of down to like as essential a point as I can. And then I want to try to fix them there in like a really durable little kernel. So for when I'm not thinking as clearly, or when I'm not, when I'm not, I'm not working in this mode, I can be like, okay, I do know, I think I know this, or I think, here's what I've thought of before about this. It just kind of gives me a little bit of, um, coordinates. I mean, to quote a song from that record itself, and that's end up being what the record's about. It's about this person trying to like reduce like their like as they're losing all their memories, they're trying to find out like what's kind of the thing that's going to make the jump um, into memory loss. And the fascinating thing for me on that note, and everybody knows this from the Radio Lab episode, but there's that famous case of the music conductor who like has the kind of memento disorder where he can't remember anything for more than 2 or 3 minutes at a time. But if you get him in front of his orchestra with his conductor baton, you can do like a 45 minute, an hour long piece of music, which is means that the music has transcended his memory loss.
Right. But the music, in some sense, is the memory.
Is
Right.
yeah,
It's
is
the,
the
the
memory.
enactment of the memory.
Right.
I
Yeah.
think sometimes I sometimes I teach a course on comedy at DePaul, and we talk about improvisation. And
Yeah.
we're not just talking about comedy for this part, but just about improv and music and whatnot.
Yeah.
And it seems so um, like this great thing that some people can do, and you just wonder how is it possible. And so I've thought about it for many years, and I try to make it less mysterious by telling the students, in some sense, all of life is improv, right? That's just all we're doing all the time when you have a conversation with a friend.
Yeah.
But there's an even deeper point here too, and that is that thinking is not something that takes place in some sort of ethereal,
Yeah.
non-physical realm, but thinking is the act of having the conversation.
Yeah.
It's
Totally.
right. Yeah. So I'll ask a student, tell me everything you know about Santa Claus right now. Just
Yeah.
talk to me. And then
Right.
they just do it, and they improv it. But the act of thinking, it's not first you think, well, he's got a beard, and then you say he has a beard.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
It's the act of saying he has a beard is the act of thinking. So I think
Yeah.
that maybe with somebody like you who has such a talent, that the the poetic words and the music, that is the act of thought itself, that
Yeah.
is the
That is the
mind
thought.
working
Yeah.
things out. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you're right. I mean, that's and again, it does feel like when I'm thinking in a way that's most true, or that's the most sort of like it really does feel like that those are my moments of clarity, and then everything else is kind of me just like groping around.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Right.
definitely.
Well, I said I'm starting with the two questions. We're already deep into it,
Yeah.
but just to keep that on an even keel, the second question that I'm asking all our contributors is that the album is titled "Solitude and Sickness," Sickness and Solitude, and I wanted to ask them if those two themes have been important themes in their life in general, not just for this last year. Um, and I certainly know that that sickness is to a certain degree with you, and we can maybe talk a little bit about more of that
Yeah, of
in with
course.
the particular song. But is there anything you'd like to say about that in general? Have you
Yeah,
felt
about,
these are themes that, right,
about
make you
sickness.
who you are even?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, definitely. I was actually so I mean, for the listeners out there, I've been dealing with chronic illness most of my life, which we'll probably get into this with the song because it starts off with a pretty autobiographical bit. Um, but it's just having the thought the other day, as I've had throughout my life, which is a kind of counterfactual experiment of what I like. Who's Kyle Morton without all of this, without all the sickness, like, you know, taller, probably more like probably like I'm not on all these sort of immunosuppressant drugs, thinking more clearly, basically just imagining this very like robust, virile person. And it always makes me laugh because it's just of course, I mean, everybody has these. Or I think it's a very natural tendency to be like, well, these are the obstacles like preventing me from being, from being whatever it is. But I kind of reversed it and was like, well, being sick is actually the only thing special about me, for in a lot of times in my life. And I would actually, I think having that as part of my identity is sort of as devastating as it has been, the actual sickness, like having that be kind of a core part of my identity is, I think it's been helpful. I think it's whether it's been a crutch for, it's like, well, if this is really hard for me, it's probably because of this, or it's something like, well, I'm ahead of the curve. Like everyone's going to have to face this at some point, and I've had a lot of time to prepare. Like that, and the song that I wrote for this project is kind of along these lines, which is like maybe there's a small bit of insight I can, or encouragement I can give to folks that are now having to deal with sickness for the first time, or deal with mortality for the first time, because these are things that, it's it's there, like it's the only certainty, like the decay of the body, your death. These are the only things that like you're really going to be able to count on. um and that can bring you to a lonely place. But I think there's a weird like kind of irony there, or paradox there, because I think that is, and this is, now I'm just gonna have to start like saying the lyrics to the song I wrote for this project, but that is kind of the place where what we all share. Ironically, that's the thing we all share, is that we are all kind of, um that we're all dying, and that can be an incredibly isolating feeling.
Yeah.
So
Well, the counterfactual question, I think, just to start with that, it
yeah,
turned it. It's. I think you're right. It's very common,
yeah,
um, and it probably has something to do with the fact that we reify this notion of the self as something other than the autobiographical physical self that we are, and think
yeah,
like I've heard people say, well, what would I be? What would I be like? What would my life be like if I had different parents?
yeah,
And you just think about the absurdity of that question on a certain level, because you
yeah.
wouldn't be, it wouldn't be you,
Unrecognizable.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And so without romanticizing the pain that you've been through,
yeah,
it's just to acknowledge it and say, well, who who would that Kyle be
yeah,
without that tick?
yeah,
Well, I mean, that wouldn't be Kyle, it'd be
yeah.
somebody else.
It'd be somebody else. And man, I almost so I started on a different idea for the song that I wrote for this project, that was like the science fiction genre, of
Mhm.
a character trying to make the jump into someone else's mind. They're building a device to try to become someone else, and it was going to, and somehow is going to end with this kind of like the problem of like, this is just the basic problem of that, which is that you'd be unrecognizable, so that where you start out, it becomes meaningless then if you become someone else, and you sort of just start over. It's this kind of like, it, it's this kind of like hellish joke where like, oh well, then you're this new character that then wants to build a machine that wants to jump someone else's into someone else's being.
That's
So
pretty brilliant. I hope we get to hear that song at some
yeah,
point.
maybe so. I even had
Let's
the music for it, but I'll let you know if
for the
we.
next Sickness and Solitude album. Now that's what I call Sickness and Solitude, Volume 2.
Monster
But I
Ballad,
think
Sickness and Solitude.
but there's some desire to imagine, right? If my life had taken this particular path, what would I be? And
Yeah.
but it's really just sort of spinning wheels to do that.
I think
Yeah,
it's almost a death wish because we want to make ourselves into an object. Like you imagine yourself as an object, which is this one, I'm as an image, which unfortunately is so often how we see the other too, as an object, as this thing that's fixed, or to bring that word back again, or like self-contained or whatever. And I think you and I are in pretty basic agreement that's not really the case.
right.
Um, in
Yeah.
fact, I finished the chapter in your book, the monster at the end of this book, and it was, and you had a bit about, trying to remember which part it was, but it was talking about trying to make something into an object, to make something permanent, and how like just ludicrous that is.
I think you and I share the same, I don't want to put the word obsession in your mouth, but with finality and mortality. And there's a there's a level on which wanting something to be eternal, wanting to turn it into a thing that can maybe last forever,
Yeah,
is just obviously crazy.
yeah,
I mean, and I even, I'll sometimes tell my students that I really like Snickers candy bars, but the
yeah.
idea of having an infinitely long Snickers bar shoved down my mouth for all eternity, right? That I
So,
don't think I'd like it. So just because something ends doesn't mean that it's lacking somehow or that it's
yeah,
bad somehow.
yeah,
So I get all of that,
yeah,
but I just don't feel it.
yeah.
That's
Totally.
my problem. I feel the sadness
Yeah,
of the death all around me,
yeah,
even though I get that
yeah.
it's an okay thing.
Yeah, even though we both like would agree that something like Peter Thiel injecting child's blood into his body to try to live forever is beyond grotesque. Uh, that I get his impulse, and if we were filthy, criminally rich, maybe we would be we'd be vampirically sucking children's blood as well.
It's a weird thing, isn't it? To have
I,
thought
I
about it so much and to, yeah,
yeah,
to get it on an intellectual level, but to still,
yeah,
like, yeah. But then, like, to bring it back to the song, our shared love for Galway Canal,
yeah,
with this, that living brings you to death, right? There's no other road, and yet the wages of death are, the wages of dying are love,
yeah,
right? So you get paid for this horrible horrible thing that we're doing, and the only way to get that payment, that beautiful payment of love, is by being this mortal creature.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It was cool. It was actually, I picked up the, is it Marisa Mayer's
Maurice.
Maurice. I picked
Mhm.
up her book,
Aw,
and that was the opening, what do you call it, epigraph.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
reminded me, it's just such a great line.
That's a good poem. It's that poem of Little Sleep's Head, of
Yeah,
just coming in and seeing his baby daughter, and
yeah,
then this meditation on the fact that his baby daughter is alive and that she's dying now,
yeah,
as we all are. And
moment,
what does
yeah,
that mean, moment by moment?
yeah. um it's actually, it's a strange thing, and I wonder if they'll get a chance to listen to this, but I actually, befriended Galway's son, Fergus, who appears in, several of his poems. um and I actually met him about the same time I was started reading. It was just kind of a kismet thing, and we've
Oh,
never actually talked about, his father's poetry, and I don't even know that he would know that I'm such a fan. But it's strange when you say that, because we had dinner with him and his partner, a dear friend of ours, Liz, in the summer, and I don't know, just that strange like intertextual thing of like when I think of Galway's poems about, you know, the sort of fragility of the ones he loves, but then that here they are and like having a having dinner under this tree on a beautiful summer night in the middle of a plague, um, and that, you know, the wages are being paid.
Yeah. You know, a moment like that also reminds me of Hannah Arendt appears in your song as well,
Yeah.
who's famous for the banality of evil
Yes.
idea. And there's a, a nice anarchist thinker who thinks about the banality of goodness and the banality of happiness.
Yeah.
And I've really started to try to embrace that too, that this happiness is not this thing we should be searching for, this huge big goal, but it's that little moment of
Yeah.
under the tree and the picnic, and
Of
it,
course.
all that joy really is banal, or we
Yeah.
hope that it is in our lives.
Yeah, right. I had a conversation recently along these lines, which was that I don't, you know, when I'm feeling really receptive to my life and the experiences of it, and I just realize how you know how beautiful all of it is. It's not like I feel like, oh, I need to go climb the pyramids, or I need to go, you know, I need to go explore the jungles of the Amazon, or go to, you know, or I don't know, like these kind of material ways of measuring life experience when you think of like cliches like bucket lists or
Right.
whatever it is. I just think of like, no, I kind of just want to be a little more receptive to like, you know, going back to like the dinner motif, but like, you know, making dinner for my wife and then us sitting down and having it and my dog being there and like just, you know, the things that are always all around you and that you know, you acclimate to the point of taking completely for granted. But I mean, mortality is that foil, and for me, that is the superpower. It's like when you know you're going to die, and you might imagine this is the last supper. Every supper is the last supper. Then you kind of it takes on a completely different aspect.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's something too in what you just said, that it's very, I don't know how to say it exactly, but it's very male centric. I think this idea of climb
Yeah,
a mountain, fight
yeah,
a war, right? Do this big
yeah.
thing.
I've
That
done.
there's very,
Yeah,
yeah, it's boys that do that, right?
boys like to climb the tall thing. Yeah,
Right. And to see that as the only meaningful thing, or the only way to achieve
yeah,
happiness or memory or something like that, which is
yeah.
sort of silly in the end.
Yeah, it seems sort of silly and doesn't yeah, I mean, I yeah, I don't know. I'm just imagining all of the bodies on Mount Everest right now. I don't know. It just
Right.
seems like they kind of like it's like a they, like they mixed up their metaphors and then, you know, perished on a mountainside.
Derrida, when he was writing his eulogy for Levinas, um, defined death as non-response, as silence, the silence of the other.
Yeah.
And and so thinking about the title of your song and that refrain that comes to us from it,
Yeah.
I think that comes from, I don't know a lot about it. I know there was a physician, Rene Leriche, I think something like 100 years ago, who said that a
Yeah.
life lived in health is a life lived in the silence
In
of the
silence
organs.
of the organs. Yeah. I don't know a ton about Lariche. I made sure to kind of do a cursory checks just to, you know, just to see what his whole deal was. I actually got that quote out of Ivan Illich, and I think his medical nemesis. He
Mm,
quotes that Lariche quote, which, you know, I think I read when I was like 24, 25, and it kind of like devastated me. It was, you know, on the one hand, that's his Ivan Illich's medical nemesis is a lot of like statistical um, evidence for why um, our obsession with health and the industries of hospitals can actually, you know, ruin our health. I think the first line in that book is something like, "Doctors pose a very serious threat to our collective health," or something.
mm.
Uh,
Gotta love it.
good old Ivan. But then there's a, you know, there's a whole other dimension of that book that was sort of just about the our losing our kind of our our theater or our context for thinking about death, and just this trend towards just trying to prolong life indefinitely. And as we have, I know firsthand about this. We have some very monstrous ways of doing that. Like, for example, I have an organ transplant, which seems like something out of Frankenstein or something. And I'm very grateful. And it's, for me, it's something I feel I'm blessed with, but it's also opened up the possibility for illegal organ trades and like, all of this. So, but digressing a bit. So back to that quote, "The silence of the organs."
Let me ask this. So I think kind of tying it together with the Derrida thing,
Yeah.
that you, throughout the song, that silence is in some sense equated with a kind of Derridian death. It's that, right, they're going silent. Whereas originally, perhaps it was meant in the opposite way, that
Right. You
if
don't
you don't
think.
have an organ that's screaming for attention, then
Yeah.
it's healthy.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
maybe that dialectic is at work on a deeper level too, with a lot of the things we've been talking about.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. The silence of the organs can mean two things. Then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that it ends up being the sort of final silence. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, I had a lot of fun making the song, Peter. Even though it's a song about sickness and solitude and death. Uh, so thank you for giving me a shot at this. Um, yeah, I just I had some of these ideas kicking around that were sort of like, some of them were ideas from back in the White Lighter period, and some were just ones I'd had recently, and then a lot of it was, we talked about improv, but I was trying to write in a different way that wasn't quite as, there was a little more stream of consciousness than I would normally write. I'm very heavy on the editing and rewriting and kind of going back, and this was I tried to sort of sing it as I was thinking it. Um, and the silence of the organs is something that stuck out to me reading it, because I remember when, and I write about this in the song, that moment that it became clear to me that there was no cure for what I was going through, and furthermore, there was no cure for life at all except for death. And it was this, I was at dialysis, and there was a social worker there who said something like, well, there's no cure. There'll be receiving treatment for the rest of your life. And like, fuck that guy. I mean, he really he really messed me up. I was like 14 years old or 15 years old. But I would have kind of figured that anyway, and I was already grappling with all this stuff. But I went home and was like lying in my bottom bunk of my bunk bed, thinking like, well, this is for the rest of my life, and who knows how long that is. And anyway, I would have had to deal with that anyway. Like, I realized, like, I was already looking at mortality. It wasn't like this suddenly got introduced. It was already there. So the silence of the organs in that original sense is an ignorance.
I was going to ask you the impossible question, just ridiculous question of how are you able so brilliantly to take something so personal and make it seem so, not just universal, but so important, I think, to everybody. And that's an impossible question to ask you. So why are you so good at this,
Very
right?
nice.
But but it's I don't know how to, put my finger on it. I don't know what it is that creates that sort of talent, because I think we all know sometimes there's art, and I'll put
Yeah.
a couple of scare quotes there, of
Yeah.
where it's just confession. It's like somebody reading from their journal,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
just think, well, this, I'm glad you're getting it out, but maybe you should,
Yeah.
talk to a therapist about it instead. And
Sure.
then there's art that somehow is able to take a lived experience and then just crack it open, and you just see all of it. And that's what you do all the time. That's what this song certainly does.
Thanks, Pete. I mean, that means a lot. First, I I I think I don't know what I accomplish. I mean, I it's all I know how to do. Um, I will say that I know what you mean about the kind of like the dangers of confessional music, and that it can be a kind of trap. And I think that's especially true. Like, for me, I'm very hypersensitive to when someone's trying very hard to get across that they're going through, so, like that, like you want to come across as having an authentic feeling, or you want to, or put simply, this song sounds like you really want to write a song like that, you know,
Right.
like
Yeah.
that problem. And I'm very, and I apply that to myself a lot whenever I'm writing, is like, do I have something to say here? Does this seem important to me? Does this seem like I can get it out in a way that doesn't just seem like kind of masturbatory or something? Um, and yeah, I don't know. That's a very kind compliment. I don't know. It may be over charitable, but if I, the one thing I kind of know how to do, or the one thing that's kind of in my nature, is something kind of like Kafka's dog in Investigations of a Dog, which is like, I can't, the thing that everyone else seems to just be able to say, like, oh yeah, like that's that, but let it go. Like, we don't talk about that. We don't, like, why bother? I cannot let go. That's a bone I cannot take. Like, I just have to keep sinking my teeth into, because it just like seems insane to me that this wouldn't be the main preoccupation for everyone. Um, yeah. So like this, it's this kind of like, death is this kind of public secret, which I really like
Right.
that term, and I use it on the record. But death is this kind of public secret that's acknowledged. But I have either the talent, or, as I like to think, the kind of like foolishness to want to actually keep trying to like get at it, or reveal the secret, or whatever it is.
Well, it's not foolishness. I mean, there's another end of that spectrum that you're able to avoid too, that I just find uncanny, and that is that on the other end, some art can be so not personal, and so very often with a message, that it becomes a kind of propaganda, or here are my ideas about this.
Yeah.
And then, like, to the other person you say, well, maybe you should just talk to your therapist. To that person you say, well, maybe you should just write an essay or
Yeah.
something, right? Or you set out your arguments, but don't
Volunteer.
use art,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you avoid that too.
Yeah. That
um,
you're no, you're I think we're just kindred spirits here, because those are kind of my two goalposts, like to stay like, or rather these two like magnetic poles that kind of try to weave in between. Because yeah, because one is sort of overindulgent confessionalism, and the other is polemic. Um, and it's been interesting. I mean, you mentioned the record we just put out, and there's some very clear me working through some my working through of some pretty contemporary topics, like conspiracy theories or the protests or whatever. And there were a couple people who said, like, the most politically charged Typhoon record, and it's weird because I kind of shuddered at that, because that didn't quite seem right to apply that. Like, if anything, politics has just kind of jumped its bounds and is now just seeped into everything. So it's going to show up in like, just like, like for me not to include some of like my thoughts on that in the writing would just be me kind of like occluding just what life is like these days. But I do try hard, and I think of Nabokov a lot of this, when he would call anything that's polemical, he just called it topical trash, which I don't totally agree with him, and I think he was kind of a snob in this regard. But I just, yeah, I'm not trying to make music that's like, this is not, this is I'm going to make a pun here, but I'm not trying to make music that's instrumental for anything. Like, I'm not trying, I mean, other than trying to like communicate with another person. That's the only real, for me, it's like writing the song is about thinking the thing, and then sharing the song is about trying to communicate with some other person. Like, those are, if there's any like objective to any of this, that that's it.
yeah. Well, as we come to an end here, let me just say too that one of the things that just really touched me deeply in the song as well is that it does begin by setting this out as a very isolating experience, this confrontation with death, and how it can make us feel so alone. But then there are all of these sort of insidious ways in which it brings
Yeah.
us together because of that. And by
Yeah.
the very end of the song, you have that same refrain: the only thing that's certain and makes you feel so
Yeah.
uncertain, the only thing common makes us feel. It comes back, but it seems to me like it's refocused now, it's
Yeah.
reframed.
Yeah.
And the doctor's in bed with the patient,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you
There's a
can't live forever, but you can live good, right? And you
yeah,
can, yeah, they think it's a kind of intersubjective instead of solipsistic
yeah,
moment.
yeah. I mean that. Yeah, I mean I think that is. I re- I I think I'm trying to think if there's a student of Husserl that said something along these lines, but like maybe we can't, maybe actual like contact or connection with another person, or bridging the kind of void between two different conscious entities is impossible, but you have to try, like you have to try, or else or else nothing matters. And I'll have to try to remember who said that, but I for me that is so much of it, and that gets back to this thing of how I try to escape it just being like woe is me. And there's a little bit of that in the song, but I tried to then bring it back around, and you were kind enough to observe this, but there's the line of what did I ever do to deserve this? There's no consent in being born. There's this little bit of self-loathing that happens there, and that was intentional. I was sort of trying to do this like 14-year-old Kyle. But then it brings that whole verse back around the chorus, which I don't typically do choruses, but I like this because it actually gets a complete chord change. It's just in a different register, so it gives it this kind of more ascendant feeling. As the narrator character is trying to talk the person out of either shooting themselves or shooting someone else, out of the despair that comes with this knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kyle, you and I could easily talk for a couple hours about
Yeah.
this. And a good day for me would be a day that I get to talk to you about it for 8 hours.
Yeah.
But Kyle Morton, thank you for being a part of this. It's an incredible honor to have you as a part of this. And I just want to say that if you don't keep making music all the time, I'm going to divorce you.
Okay. Just get in line, man. Peter,
Thank you,
thanks so
Kyle.
much for having me. It's an honor to be part of this project, and I can't wait to hear all the other pieces.